Hi everyone, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Avaya Solution Deployment Manager. IAUG is pleased to add this informative and educational webcast to our 2019 program. Before we start, I'd like to share a few tips for using the GoToWebinar during today's presentation. First, you can minimize your navigation bar by clicking the top arrow button. I encourage you to submit questions throughout this event via the question and answer box on your webinar toolbar. Our speakers will answer questions at the end of the presentation. Lastly, a recording of this presentation will be available for download on the IAUG website by the end of today. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to our speaker, Senior Telecom Engineer at Michigan State University, Marc Fenneuff.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Molly, for the introduction. I'm a Senior Telecom Engineer at Michigan State University. I've been here for 2 years. Prior to that, I was with a business partner, SPS, now Converge One. I was more of a network engineer at SPS, so I did not actually get a lot of exposure to system manager, session manager. I had a pretty good amount of communication manager knowledge, but since being at the university, I was pretty much, SDM was actually one of the first things that they wanted me to try to get in and tackle. So let's get into the slides here. There we go. Anything worth doing is doing right. SDM is Avaya's way of doing these tasks in an automated fashion and in a fashion where you're not allowed to mess up, I guess is the best way to say. So I thought that this quote was appropriate. So what do we do with SDM? Well, it keeps your equipment patched. It can do media gateways. It can do 8300s. It can do any Avaya appliances, also known as AVPs, and it can actually do your TN boards in your G650s. TN boards only, we can't do IPSIs. The only person that can manage an IPSI is going to be you through Communication Manager or one of your techs connecting into the services port on the IPSI itself. Apologize for the delay in changing the slides. It's a little slow on my end. So these are specifically the tasks that you can perform with the SDM. You can find the files that you're going to need. It's not necessarily looking on the Avaya website, trying to find your hardware, trying to find your specific vintage, trying to find out if you have an entitlement to it. SDM is going to automate that process for you. With those files, you can update your gateways, the modules inside those gateways, and TN boards inside your G650s. Certain Aura applications, you can also patch them with the SDM. You can install service and feature packs for the CM, Session Manager Utility Server. You can also patch the AVP itself. That's not going to include every Aura application. There's only a subset that the SDM can actually patch for you. The SDM, and specifically the SDM Client, is also used to deploy OVAs. You can deploy OVAs in your client VM environment, or you can deploy them on an AVP. Assuming you've got a system manager in your environment today, that would have been deployed by your business partner using the SDM client, the standalone SDM client that's actually loaded on your Windows computer. So this slide was stolen from the 2016 Technology Forum. Thank you, Michael, for giving a good view of what Avaya's intents are with the SDM. You know, before we had this tool, you're doing a lot of work in the CLI. If you had multiple devices to do, you might be doing those one by one. They're saying that the process could have been error prone as well. I think that leads back to, again, you went out to PLDS, do I have the right firmware file for my particular vintage board that I'm looking for, things like that. So SDM is gonna save you from all of that. Moving to SDM on the right, automatic, I think they mean that this can be a scheduled process. You can actually batch all these jobs. You can find all your MM modules of a certain vintage, or you can find all your G430s, G450s of a certain vintage, and you can you can actually patch those as one job, and you can schedule it. So you could actually create this job, set it to run overnight, come in the morning, check on it in the morning. I don't know how many of us are actually going to do that, but yeah, it does give you the ability to schedule it and run it while you do other things. Reliability, definitely an important check and balance that they add to the process, especially when you see later in the slide deck when VMs are patched, there's actually a pre-upgrade check that the SDM goes through, and it actually makes sure do you have the right resources on your VM to support this, and there's a whole bunch of checks and balances that SDM does for you. So again, you're not making errors. So the best analogy that I could come up with for the SDM is this commercial from Kayak. I'm sure you remember it. So imagine that being your tech department or yourself working on multiple devices and having to do all that work at the same time, whereas you can use one tool with the SDM. So what do we not do with the SDM? Not intended for doing any kind of configuration on your media gateways. You're not changing SNMP, changing host names, IP addresses. One of the things you may do in your environment is turn on quality of service statistics. Nope, it's not done with the SDM, strictly for patching. You also are not going to use it for any kind of software, pushing out software to your phones of any type, whether it's an IP phone or a TDM phone. And as I mentioned before, not all applications in the Aura suite are actually supported for patching by the SDM. Examples are standalone WebLM, media server, or messaging. You don't actually use it to patch that, but session manager, communication manager, system manager, absolutely. So part of the difficulty, if any of you have looked at using SDM before, is trying to know where to get started. And if you are trying to go through a certain process, why isn't this working? Why am I getting an error message? Well, there's lots of prerequisites. Obviously, you need to have your system manager up and in production. Anybody on 6.3, 6. or 7.0, this is expected to be there. And the intent of this presentation is you've already got your system manager in place, so you've got an SDM ready to go. We're not going to show how you would actually get that installed. So besides having system manager running, you need a software library set up. We'll cover that. The thing you want to patch, so know what your devices are. SDM actually needs to know what these devices are, how to reach them, credentials to log into them, things of that nature. And in particular, if the device is an Aura application or a server sitting on an AVP, that device has to be seen by SDM within the VM management tool. And a communication manager element like a gateway or anything on that gateway, that's going to exist in inventory. Inventory is actually not in the SDM, but we'll get to that. SNMP, it does need to be configured. Certain Aura applications will need an SNMP profile configured, others will not. Media gateways absolutely need SNMP configured correctly. So this is done with an access profile configured in System Manager and by an SNMP configuration on the device itself. And we'll show how to do that on, for example, a media gateway, as well as I think communication manager is what I'll be showing. For VM management, one of the things that gets missed or is not necessarily documented that well is if you go into VM management and you want to see your stuff, which is going to be your applications, oh, it's empty. Well, before you can actually have anything within VM management, you've got to have a location created and you've got to find the hosts in your environment. And you've got to have trust established for those hosts. That will be, the intent of this is to show kind of soup to nuts how you do these tasks all the way through. And as I mentioned before, SDM Client, you can actually do most of these tasks with the SDM Client as a standalone software on your computer. So the software library is within Solution Deployment Manager, and that's how you get to Solution Deployment Manager. Maybe you've seen it, maybe you've clicked on it accidentally when you're going to do something else in System Manager, but this is how you get to it. Click on it down there, and we're going to start with the software library. So within Solution Deployment Manager, over on the left, I'm going to mouse around on here, and I hope everybody can see my mouse okay, but to get the software library going, you actually do need your PLDS credentials configured in SDM. So that's done here in user settings. I actually found that it's easiest to log into PLDS before you do this, test your credentials, and it will also give you a company ID if you go to your information within PLDS. We haven't necessarily had to populate this in my experience, but it's asterisk, so it's acting like it wants a company ID. So log into PLDS, check your connection, or check your credentials rather, and then get your company ID and pop it in here. They quite helpfully put a test connection here within the page. However, no browser that I've used actually works. This could be fixed with Aura 8. We just upgraded to System Manager 8 at the university, and I have not had the opportunity yet to test any of these changes, but they'll make it into a future presentation. Any goodies that happen with Aura 8. So I want to back up a little bit. I think we're getting double clicked here. Okay. So after entering your credentials, the next step is configuring a software library. And that's done, again, over here on the left with software library management. The default library is going to be your local system manager, called out here as SMGR default local. And you can create additional servers. We actually use a Linux server here at the university, and it runs both the FTP and the SCP protocols. You're going to find out that certain devices that you want to patch require one protocol and certain devices require the other one. So you would actually click on one of the software libraries or create a new one, and this is how it's configured. You've got tabs across the top, and you would give it your friendly name here, give it your IP address, path where the files are going to be stored, and then the default protocol for it to use. And then there's also tabs for the protocols that you're going to assign for that particular software library. Caveat here, to manage media gateways, you can't do it with the System Manager local library. It has to be done with an FTP server, and it has to be something else. So if you want to patch your media gateways with the SDM, you actually do need another server somewhere that can do FTP for you. So here I've shown where you would actually make the FTP configuration for your software library. Again, you can configure all these protocols independently, set up a username and password for them, and then you can choose to enable or disable that particular protocol for that software library. And you definitely want to test this. This is definitely one where if you've got an FTP client, you can use the test, or SecureFX I've called out here. You can do FTP or SCP with that. Go ahead and give it a test with that, and make sure that you can get to the folder and see where the files are. And then as you populate the software library with files from Avaya, you can actually start to see that folder start to fill up with information. It's not exactly easy to tell what's what. the way the folder structure is done, but you can actually see, start to see it get filled up as you start downloading software through the SDM. Note here, I've already talked about FTP for media gateways. SCP protocol has to be used for TN boards. So there's no restriction on the system manager library. You can use the system manager software library for TN board updates, but you do need to enable SCP on that. So the software files themselves are actually pulled into the library via download management. Again, that's over here on the left. I've scrunched this down a bit. We're going to revisit this page through the SDM patch process, and I'm going to show you what each of these sections mean. But download management is where you would actually, if you wanted to manually download a file, if you wanted to do some management where you didn't, where you wanted to remove files that you don't need any longer, et cetera, et cetera. That's where that's done in download management, and we'll come back to that during actual example of a patch process. Next prerequisite is SNMP. So this is actually done, again, outside the SDM itself. Oh, there we go. I'm getting ahead of myself. Yeah. So configurations is actually where SNMP is configured for the SDM to use. So you click on configurations, and you'll be taken to this tab here. And what you're looking for is global SNMP configuration. You would click on that, and then you can view existing access profiles or create new ones. Here I've created 2 profiles, one for V1 SNMP and one for V3. And part of the mechanism that SDM uses is you actually choose one of these profiles for the operation that you're doing. Although V3 seems to work fine for the discovery process of elements, it doesn't seem to work for the actual patching. So we've been doing testing with both V3 and V1. We've also worked with Avaya on that, and V1 works all day long. V3 still has issues. And once we have the opportunity at the university to do some further testing with that, if that changes, I'll certainly update this presentation. So again, you would add or edit a profile for this. Pick your name, version, authentication type for V3, obviously, passwords, etc. All this information obviously is going to need to match the configuration that you put on the device itself. If that's a media gateway, you're going to be doing that in the CLI. And if that's an Aura application or an Aura server, that's going to be within the web UI under the admin tab. And I'm going to show both of those coming up. So now that we've got the SNMP profile created, we actually need to go into inventory. This is still a feature or a function that is outside the SDM. And this is where inventory is in System Manager. Again, assuming that you had a business partner implement your Aura 7, inventory could be completely empty if you looked at it today, except for your Communication Manager. All of System Manager's integration with Communication Manager and with Aura messaging rely on that server existing in inventory. So what we would do with the SDM as the end user customer, excuse me, is to populate that inventory and get your, in the cases of this example, get your Communication Manager elements into inventory. So this is how we do it. So anything that you want to manage with the SDM, you get to pull it into your inventory, and that device is called an element. And how you add them is by creating your access profile, which we just showed, and then within the inventory tool, we use the subnet configuration function to add subnets to search for the devices. And then we use the manage elements function to actually discover these devices. Now, devices can be added manually, and I've got a couple slides for that later. The university has well over 100 media gateways. So if you consider the media modules inside those gateways, that's a large number of elements. The best way for us to do it was actually just to do a search. And technically, in a large environment, you could find devices that you may, they're not where you think you are, or you find devices that you did not know that you had doing it this way. Smaller environment, yes, you can add them individually, and I will show that coming up. So configuring SNMP, we now actually need to do that on the device that we want SDM to find, because even though we know that it's there, and the communication manager knows what that device is, system manager is still dumb about it. So this is an example of CLI entry on a media gateway, a G450 in this case. And the critical pieces are, of course, the SNMP configuration. And here we've chosen V3 for this, and we've got username and
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
Oh, I was just going to jump in. I believe that your slides are frozen. I'm not sure if you want to check your internet connection.
I can restart. What's the last slide you're seeing?
We are currently viewing the software library.
Oh my gosh, you're way behind then. All right, let's go to software library. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to restart the screen share. And Molly, please let me know if you see it changed to configurations.
Yes, it did.
Okay. So I believe I covered software library. Please do hit Molly up with questions, and we'll cover those at the end of this. So configurations is where SNMP is configured within System Manager. I'll just quickly move through this so that we can get caught back up. Your SNMP configuration outside the SDM, it's configured here. You can either add a new or click on an existing and click edit. We're using V1 and V3 at the university, and we simply give it a name, choose your authentication types and your passwords, and then obviously those need to match on the target device. And we're going to go to inventory now. And elements again are added to inventory by configuring an SNMP on that device, and then configuring the subnets to search for within inventory, and then adding those devices that inventory finds as elements. So when where we last left off, this is what I had hoped everybody could actually see, which is a CLI example of configuring SNMP on a media gateway. So these are the commands to configure, in this case, SNMP v3. When you put these commands in, you'll be prompted for the password. I want to add a little bit of information, or what we found to be helpful. An SNMP system name is not required, but there's two reasons why we like to put this in. The first is quite simply for communication manager. If you get a large number of media gateways, we've actually found that if you put the media gateway number into the SNMP system name, that it, apologize. The media gateway number in the system name actually helps you as a human distinguish between the media gateways that you've got. So if you're working on something in System Manager and you want to jump over to CM and see what it is, you already know that it's media gateway 113. If you do not put a descriptive system name in here, when inventory finds this device, it's only going to show up as an IP address. So putting a system name in gives you a much better check on what device am I actually looking at. Very helpful if you got a lot of gateways. So again, from the inventory tab, we would go to subnet configuration, and we would actually add in the subnets that we want to search for. And here I've got Acres Hall chosen. There's your network and your network mask. The function of the search, for some reason it has a drop down here and asks you to specify how many IPs you want to scan. The next slide I think shows, yeah. So regardless of the mask that you put in, you can tell it to scan all these IP addresses. We have many subnets at the university. Everything's a Class C basically, and all of our gateways or any kind of statically assigned devices are all down low. So I fake it out a little bit here. I put in a different mask. It's only going to check the first 30 IPs. We've found in practice that's actually quicker.
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
Just going to interrupt you again to say that we are currently still viewing the inventory configuring SNMP slide.
Oh, that's not good. I don't know why it's not updating for us. I think what I'll try to do, Molly, is every couple minutes I will change the sharing. And can you tell me if you're seeing inventory specifying subnets?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So here again is where, in order for the inventory tool to go out and search your environment and find devices in this case, you'd actually put in a name for it, address, subnet mask, and as I was mentioning before the screen froze, we actually fake the mask out, fake the tool out, and put in a smaller mask just so it'll stop after searching 30 addresses. We've actually found it is quicker because with the number of subnets the university has, we had a lot to enter, and you can within this function you can choose multiple subnets, and the process is going to be quite a bit quicker if it's going to go through 30 IPs rather than the entire class C subnet. So I want to back up. I want to make sure. Okay. So once you've got the subnets configured, you can actually perform a discovery. So we're getting closer to being able to actually get these devices in. And discovery is performed from the discovery tab. We would choose a discovery profile. In this case, I've created one. Let's see which one it is. Test. So you simply give it a name, pick the subnets from the list of subnets that you've already configured, and then you have to choose an element type. This is just a little bit further down in the screen. In this case, media gateway and media module. You have to choose this. You're going to get no returns if you happen to choose the wrong device. I will say all the other element types that are shown here, we haven't at the university had a need to try to find these devices. This is strictly to find the large number of media gateways that we have. And I'm going to do a screen refresh just to make sure that we stay on track. The last thing to choose there is your access profile. Again, that was created previously. Check that off and click commit. And then we select the discovery profile that we just edited and click discover now. And you should see a status message. This has a tendency to go out to lunch when it's running, so you should get a pop-up like this, but you might want to refresh the screen if you don't see any changes in a short amount of time. Once the job is done, though, you should see success message. And I'm going to refresh the screen again. I want to make sure that we're getting this correctly. So now we'll actually, should actually have stuff start to show up in inventory. Again, here's the Manage Elements tab. And we've pulled in a device. Here's the G450. I've done some filtering here. As you should know from working within System Manager, the filter tool is actually pretty helpful. So here I filtered on one device because we would actually have pages and pages and pages of stuff to show here. But it's found a G450, and it's found media modules, including the hardware vintage within that gateway. So this is where you can start to see where it can start to give you some good information. If you click on an element, you can actually view its details. So this will be pulled right out of the CLI. It's also going to show you the access profile that was used. Down here at the bottom, so you can see we used V1. And for media gateways in particular, in order to do patching down the road, you actually need to have credentials configured. So here we've got the root login and password saved to inventory for this particular element. This has to be done for each device. You want to make sure that's in there, or SDM won't be able to patch it later. So I had mentioned earlier that you can actually add elements individually. So from the main Manage Element screen, you would click New, and you would put in the information in a screen similar to what we saw before. Give it a name, put in the IP address. You have to choose a type, and then device type is going to be a subtype. So this is a drop-down box, show the types of devices you can choose, and then here you can pick. This will have every Avaya gateway ever supported. You do need to, within that page, then scroll down and create an access profile. You can't pick one that you've already created. I don't know why, but you would actually have to, if you're going to manually add a device like this, you have to manually create an access profile for that device. One other thing to note is when it's added this way, since there's no discovery process, System Manager in inventory just shows the item. It's not going to show any details about it. It's not going to pull media modules in because there's actually no discovery done if you add a device manually like this. The discovery would occur later through the SDM function. So what's different with virtual machines? As I'd mentioned before, if your system manager is in production today, you're already going to have your CM and your session managers in there and connected in there and showing in inventory. And I'm going to refresh the screen. CM servers, even though your CM might be shown, if you've got survivable servers, LSPs out there, you would actually need to add those and configure a CM login on those in order for them to be patched. Session managers, utility servers, you don't have to do SNMP on. And AVP hosts, which remember the SDM can patch, those would need to be added in VM management as well. And any applications or server applications running on those hosts would need to have trust established, and we will show that. So I mentioned that you need to have a CM login for LSPs. So we've chosen one here, and from Manage Elements, you would actually select it, edit it, and then add in, I believe Avaya wants a profile 15 login for this, but this would be your CM login for that. Do not add an LSP to Communication Manager because that that would actually cause System Manager to begin syncing with your LSP, which you don't want to have. Add to Communication Manager should only be checked on your core CM. SNMP still required, just like gateways. You would configure it here on the Element tab. So we've shown SNMP configuration on the CLI for gateways. To configure SNMP identically on an Avaya server, here's a Communication Manager example from the admin page on the web UI. You'd click Access, add or edit an existing SNMP profile, and fill out the information exactly as before, or exactly as was done in System Manager. You also, with virtual machines, need to add them into VM management. Frequently, as I mentioned before, this gets confusing because, again, if you've got your system manager in your environment, you actually might have no information in VM management at all because it was not created at the time the system was installed. So you would create a location, you would add your AVP host to that location, and by that we mean give them a name and give them an IP address for SDM to find them. And then you would need to establish trusts to those VMs. The way that's done is from the VM management tab, and I apologize I don't show the left on here, but this is within SDM. Over on the left, you would actually choose VM management. This is called, I want to say this is called application management now with Core 8. Quick screen refresh. So we would click New, and then enter a friendly name for that device. And the name's all you need. You can put as much information in here as you want if you've got a very elaborate system, but you only need a name for the location. The hosts themselves, though, which are going to be the AVPs, the Avaya appliances, you're going to want a name, IP address, and then credentials to connect. The username and password are the VMware ESXi client credentials you would use if you were connecting with the VMware client. You should, after you click OK, you should get a prompt to accept the cert from that host, and then it will say that it's updating the device. If you click on status, you'll get all this information about what the discovery has done, including finding the VMs on here. So you can actually see, in this case, this is an old Communication Manager VM, a WebLM VM, and a utility server. Anytime I pause like this, I'm either refreshing the screen or I'm working. The last step you would need once the AVP is showing up in VM management is to configure the AVP to make sure that it's communicating with WebLM. So in this case, you would choose your AVP, click on More Actions, and click WebLM configuration. And you'll get a pop-up that, if unconfigured, is just going to show your local host. But this would be the IP address of your system manager. And you really do need to wait several minutes for it to update. Once that's done, you should see the license status change in VM management to show normal. Normal if it's a 7.1 system. A 7.0 system would show a valid. But it's important that the license is shown on there for AVP management and VM management. So once the AVP has been discovered, then you would actually want to click on the VMs that it has discovered and click Reestablish Connection. This is only going to matter with VMs that SDM can manage. So Session Manager, Communication Manager, Utility Server. You would click reestablish connection. Credentials are needed for 7.0. If you're at 7.1, you actually don't need to enter credentials here. You should see a trust establishing message. And then you should see that it's happy. At this point, you've actually got everything into the SDM that's needed. You've got your CM elements in inventory, and you've got your VMs added to VM management. This is what the staging process looks like. Molly, I'm going to try to run this until 10 minutes of, just so that I can try to get through the rest of these slides. I know I'm running behind a little bit. So the steps for actually updating the device are to refresh the device, which means the SDM would go out to the device and check to see what the hardware and software is on it. The analyze and recommend step is where SDM performs the function where it checks PLDS to see what you're entitled to and what is available for the server or gateway or element, and make a recommendation as what to update to. It will go through the mechanism where you can choose to download files for it. If it's a VM, there's going to be a pre-upgrade check stage. And as I mentioned before, that's where SDM will actually check for resources and make sure that the VMware host that you're intending to perform the update or upgrade on actually has the resources for what you're trying to do. So for the upgrade step itself, we would now go to upgrade management over on the left. And we can choose our device. Again, here I'm filtering. I've picked a G450. And again, it's hopefully showing, if you look, not only the device and the modules included, the module number or the slot number that it's in, but it's also going to show what has been done before. As you can see, I've actually done an analyze on this. It's going to show the version of software that it's currently running, and it's going to show your entitled versions. This is a pretty clean box, which was recently upgraded. I've got a slide later that shows a device that actually needs some information. This is just a blow up of the previous slide. And I'm going to refresh. I want to make sure everybody's still seeing this. Yeah, these are blow ups of the previous slide. So you would select the element that you want to work on and click refresh. In this case, I've selected the host element, and it's going to check everything underneath, which would be the G450 and all the modules installed. Either give it a job name and schedule it, or just run it now. And you'll get a little pinwheel while it's running. And then once it's finished, you can actually mouse over and look at some of the information. We're still looking at the same G450, but if you mouse over this, it actually says that there's an update required for it. And that's because at the time this was run, 38.20 was what was on the box, and 39 is out now for prepping for OR 8. These are the possible status messages that you could get there. Obviously, non-upgradable, there's nothing you can do about it. The rest, I believe, speak for themselves. This particular media gateway, it actually found another media module. So the media module, or the media gateway, was in inventory. We refreshed it, and it found an additional media module that had been added. And if you look way over on the right, you can actually see it's actually not at the current software. So there's actually a patch we could do with this, and we could patch that. So again, leaving that device checked, we'd run the analyze step. And at that point, the SDM is going to have checked PLDS to see what you're entitled to. So it's showing you, it's actually going to show in this case, which I don't have on the screen for some reason, is that media module. It can use next version for that, and it's expecting you to download. So this becomes, this is no longer grayed out. You can click on download, and it will magically transport us back to the software library. From the software library, we would expand out hardware software types, and it's going to pre-populate the gateway and the media module in this case that's needed. And then all that's required to be done is to confirm that that's the software you want. I've changed to a G350 here because I had a better device to actually show this process, if you're paying attention. And there's the firmware, or sorry, there's the media module file that we needed. Click download. We have to choose our library. So here's our software library that was configured previously, and there's the protocol to use for it. Again, we need FTP. Can't use System Manager for gateways. So select those from the drop down and click download. Accept the EULA. Everybody's seen the screen. And you can check the status if you just scroll down further on that screen. You can actually check your file download status and see what's going on with that. And that will also show you the history. As I mentioned before, if you want to start cleaning up these things, you would do that from here as well. You could select and delete them. You have to return to Upgrade Management yourself. So click back on the SDM tab, go to Upgrade Management, and then for a VM in this case, you would still need to do a pre-upgrade check step. So you would check, in this case, this is an LSP. Click pre-upgrade check. And you've got quite a bit to check here. If you remember, an upgrade of an Aura device is actually a new OVA deployment. So it's going to want to make sure what host it's going to put on, data store in that host, and all sorts of other related information. This is also a job. So you would choose your items and click schedule. And after
hey, Marc,
the pre-upgrade,
I believe that your screen is frozen one more time.
Yep, I was just getting to the refresh. I apologize. All right, that should start to show up again. In the interest of time, I'm not going to back up for those. We do have a recording for this, and I can certainly share this presentation. So the pre-upgrade check is complete, and we've got a green check. That's always good. I never know if it's going to advance for me or not. There we go. Clicking on that status will show you all the information that was checked, and it is substantial. This is, again, SDM doing all of its checks and balances to make sure that us fallible humans don't choose something wrong. So this is interesting because if you notice here, our LSP, it shows the current version and the entitled upgrade version. We're already there, but it shows that there's an update now. So this is an update, not an upgrade. This is just a patch to the existing server is what it's recommending. I've got another VM here. This is a utility server, which is an even better example because if you look, we've got exclamation points here stating that we're ready for an update and for an upgrade. And what that's saying is that this utility server is actually back on 7.0. SDM is recommending an upgrade to 7.1, and then further an update of that 7.1.00018 to 7.1.2. So in the System Manager 7, we actually had no trouble doing an upgrade and an update. It's one step for us. It's multiple steps for the SDM, but that was one job. I haven't been able to do this in 7.1. If I do or am able to do it, I will I will update this slide accordingly. Bear with me, it looks like my PowerPoint needs to restart. Molly, I should be able to finish up in just a couple more minutes, and we'll have just a couple minutes for questions. Yeah, we're just about there. All right, so the SDM has suggested an upgrade and update step for this device. We've clicked on it, and let's actually show that. Yeah, one more step. Okay, so we've selected the device, and now we can click upgrade update. Again, this should be grayed out until the pre-upgrade check is complete for, in this case, the VM. And it will actually build a job for you to do. And it's going to show the device, and it's going to ask you to edit it. It's okay that we have a red X. It just means we haven't actually edited this configuration for it. So it's going to ask at this point for a ton of information, what operation you're going to do, what file you're going to apply to it, what patch to apply after that. So again, this is going to be an upgrade and then an update. And then quite helpfully, you can actually pre-populate data. Remember, if you're going, for example, from a 7.0 server to a 7.1, that's a new OVA deployment, and it's got to fill out credentials, IP address, everything that was used when the server was first installed. So if you've got trust established correctly and you've gone through this process, you can actually put in the login credentials and have it go out to the VM and pull in all the information that you don't want to have to retype. So that's actually pretty handy. Once you've got the configuration done and you can save it, you get a green check, and you can schedule it. This is a screenshot from a completed successful upgrade. Green in this column means good. Yellow means it's waiting for a commit. So in this case, for a VM, if you commit the rollback, it's going to delete the old OVA. If this were a media gateway, it's going to change the boot bank and restart the server. Yep, there's your commit step. Tips and tricks, like I mentioned before, verify your PLDS is working. Do a friendly name in your SNMP system name. It's really going to make it a lot easier to recognize them. If you've ever used the SNMP walk tool, that's also a good way to check if you've got SNMP configured correctly and you're not trying to just chase down strange error messages in System Manager. The staging process is very powerful because you can say, all right, I want to get all my MM711s up to this version, or I want to know what software all my MM717s are. The power of the tool starts to become apparent when you realize you can get everything baseline and then update everything in kind of a stair-step fashion to get everything aligned. It's very powerful in that way. And I believe that's it.
All right, well, thank you so much, Mark. At this time, we can open up for a couple questions. If you'd like to submit one still, you can do so at the questions drop-down bar.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to get this slide deck out as well.
Okay, would you like me to read them off to you, Mark?
Sure, go ahead.
Yes. Is SFTP available to replace FTP?
SFTP is not going to work on media gateways. It's FTP only. And most other devices or most other things in the Aura environment are going to be SCP. So it is an option. You can choose that as a protocol for your software library. However, in our testing, we've only ever used SCP, FTP.
All right, next question. When there is an update to SMGR, does the SDM configuration and defined elements remain, or do they all need to be re-added and configured after the upgrade?
The elements will remain through not only an update, but an upgrade. We just did an upgrade from 7.1 to 8.0.1, and all of the inventory was carried over. And if you think about it, that's critical, because in order for System Manager to be able to sync with CM, remember the CM, your core CM has to be an element in inventory. So they need to carry that over, and it does carry over, and all the child elements do as well. In fact, we have a number of stuck jobs from CM7 or from Aura 7.1, which unfortunately carried over into 8.0. So we're going to have Avaya clean that up for us. But yeah, when you're doing your update in System Manager, you're doing a backup, and then you are incorporating that System Manager backup into the update. So all of that carries over.
Great. Charles asked, how well do you think SDM would work over a slower connection?
You know, I don't think you'd really have trouble with that. Most of the things that you are doing within SDM is just gathering information from the device. Now, I'm not sure, Charles, if you're talking about pulling devices into inventory, or if you're talking about actually doing the patch. For pulling devices into inventory, it's a pretty small amount of traffic. For doing a patch, it's a little bit more, but remember, you could always add a software library maybe closer to that source. But we haven't really encountered any issues with slow connections. And for example, we've got 5 or 6 locations that are on WAN, that are connected via some type of WAN, and we've pushed, for example, CM 7.0 to CM 7.1 upgrades to those sites without any problem. Remember, it's kind of a staging process. You're deploying a new OVA, so you're kind of just waiting on the file to transfer, and then you're going to start to do the manipulations of the OVA on the device itself, or you're going to have SDM do those manipulations.
Okay, great. Well, I believe that's all for questions at this time. So I'd like to thank you, Marc, for taking the time to speak with us all today, and everyone else for attending this event. As a reminder, a copy of today's presentation will be available for download on the IAUG website by this evening. As you exit this webcast, please complete the evaluation for today's event. Your feedback and input are really important and appreciated as we further develop our webinar series. And thank you again for attending, and thank you, Marc.
Thanks, Molly. Thanks, everyone.
All right, bye-bye.